Hey everybody, this is Scott Schnards, and I'm here with Don Gottlieb for another episode of Lunch Money with Scott and Edan. And today we are going to talk about an age-old question that comes up in sales, right? And that is the question of, is sales art or is it science? And I think a lot of people still have that stereotypical, either the charismatic Don Draper or the finger shooting used car sales guy as the kind of your quintessential salesperson. But the real question is like, is sales the domain of that charismatic or finger gun sales guy, or is it now a data driven type of experience? And I think that the debate continues to rage on. In the old days, success in sales at least really meant that you had charm, you had intuition, you had gut instincts. But I believe that today technology and data have really rewritten the playbook. The question is can you thrive in sales by leaning on the numbers alone, or do you still have to have that charm, that intuition, and those gut instincts? And I don't think that this is a simple either or, but I do think that it's a shift that we need to unpack. And Adon, I'll let you jump in here and kind of give your thoughts on it. I've got some, I'm sure you've got some ideas. I've got some ideas on this.
Well, I think first of all, my quick answer to is sales or science is yes. And it's funny because when this topic came about to discuss, I was having the debate with me, myself, and I on is it art or is it science? And with the rise of technology, is it changing? And I don't want to boil it and get to my end conclusion, but I think it's probably still the same as it was, where there's a combination of art and science. We could talk about what the distributions are. I just think some of the elements, specifically on the science side, have made a lot of evolutions or evolved into a place that gives you a lot more than what you had before. I think if I put it in kind of high level, and I think that this is not mine. Somebody said it a long time ago that kind of sales is kind of the art that is built on science. I think the way you execute the science.
Oh, that's interesting.
Has changed. Because if you think about it, art is kind of, well, let's start with science. Science is the kind of overall the way you understand the world and the world around you, and how you measure it and how you investigate it and how you learn about it. And art is more about the human side of things and your humanity part. Both exist in driving a sale. If you want to break it further, I try to map out what is, if you look at a sale, what is science, what is the science part, and kind of what is the art part of what needs to happen in sales. And so I'd be interested to see kind of your thoughts, but for me on a high level was kind of like, if you look at the science part, you got the sales process, you got your methodology, you got your data, you got your CRM, you got your the technology tool used today to kind of figure out who's in your website and how to communicate to them and how to send emails. And you got all your mechanisms you put about trying to be predictable. Oh, these guys, this is how they usually operate. This is how much they, this is how long it takes the sales to happen. And this guy's that accurate. So you could have tried to build like data science around that to create predictability. And so that's your science world.
Yeah.
But then you look at the artsy part where you have really, emotional intelligence, talking about connecting with people, building trust, communicating, understanding their world. And it felt, and it's funny because in sales, you mentioned the stereotype. It's never about, oh, he's such a human behaviorist kind of a person, but there's a lot of it in there. Some people built it through their experience versus kind of learning it in an organized fashion. But it is a lot about understanding people and how to connect them and how humans work and behave. It's Daniel Pink, right? That said, selling is human, right? This is the thing.
I think that unfortunately, I do believe that COVID killed a lot of the art of sales. I think when I think about the art of sales, in a lot of ways, I mentioned Don Draper, and I go back to the Mad Men era where deals were sealed over martinis and handshakes and, kind of the classic 3 martini lunch, when it was all about relationships and likability and knowing how to read the room. And I think that it worked then because even 20 years ago, when you and I were coming up, back then information was scarce and
Yeah.
buyers needed to connect the dots to learn about the products that they wanted to buy. And that's what the salesperson did. They were able to help connect those dots. And for a lot of people, kind of up until about 5 years ago, charisma was currency for them. The downside of that is like you rely so heavily on talent, and that success doesn't, that type of success is hard to predict because, sometimes the deals close, sometimes they didn't. And it's like, you know what, the guy didn't like me that much. And, I'll keep making some phone calls and keep taking them out for martini based lunches. And today, with buyers being more informed than ever, what's the stat from Challenger sale? Like buyers know 60 or 70% of,
60 to 80% depends on who you listen to. Yeah, they finish their sales process
exactly.
or their buying process 60% or 80% of the process before they talk to you.
So that's done. Then you've got, good CRM systems now that have predictive analytics. We'll talk a little bit more about AI and the science of sales next week in our part 2 on this. But I think like all of these tools that have been part of that, sales stack, and now companies have to go hire an ops person to manage the 20 some odd tools that you have as part of your sales stack. Science really matters. And because you can measure everything now, whether that's call volume or email open rates or pipeline velocity or win rates, it has become this game of probabilities. The downside is I think like that data takes the guesswork out of prospecting, and it takes the human element out of selling as well. Because you have these tools that just say like, hey, go call Edan because Edan is highly likely to buy, and he's probably done his 70% of his research, and now we just got to walk him through a buying process. So you can't really wing it anymore. It's, how do you run this repeatable, scalable process?
So I like how you presented the, kind of the 20 years ago, it was you had to build a personal connection, and what you brought to the table was the knowledge that today they can acquire.
Remember when you and I started selling, it was like, oh, you got to make 100 cold calls to get 10 meetings to get one deal closed.
Yeah.
Like that was like, whether you were selling cars or copiers, like that was like this universal math. Like and now the universal math is you have to have 3x your pipeline. But there was like this, for 100 years, there was this universal math of make 100 cold calls, get 10 appointments, close one deal.
Yep. And so I'll touch on that in a second, because I think there's 2 points you made that are good that I want to build on top of. One is the kind of the process that we have to go through in selling. The other one is the sales is a numbers game kind of thing, and which what you're talking about now. But to your earlier point about the dynamic was built is we connected, salespeople connected with humans, and what they brought to the table is all this knowledge about the product and how it solves the problem. And with those stats today, which, by the way, we could have a separate episode about whether it's correct or not, about 60, 80% of their buying journey has been done before they talk to you. I think it didn't change the fundamental of you have to connect with people. I think what it changed is what does the salesperson have to bring to the table now? That knowledge about the product that is no longer your currency. You really have to up your game into the, I have to truly understand their world and connect the dots for them of how I'm going to make a positive impact, how they can solve their world, really solve their problem, versus just present the, the sheet of like, here's the spec and let me walk you through the specs. I also agree that COVID kind of deteriorated, or I don't know, compromised the level of salesmanship that exists in the market, because it kind of took that element away and people lost that skill set of how do I connect with people, and then how do I get better at bringing value to that conversation.
Yeah, and I think like during COVID, I just don't feel like people wanted friends. Like people didn't want more friends. Like I don't want my sales guy to be my friend. I just want my sales guy to like help me solve a problem and help me walk me through a buying process, more than they wanted like hey Edan, let's go have a couple of cocktails and hit the strip club or whatever like people did back in the 70s and 80s to close deals. Like I don't think like that. I think that COVID killed that, almost like killed the relationship sale.
So I think it changes, or it requires you to change. You're right, it killed it the way it was. I think it's still in existence. You just need to, as a salesperson, bring something different now to the equation that helps your prospect. They're not looking for another friend, but they're looking for that. Traditionally was talked about the trusted advisor, that, somebody on your, that's what they're really looking for. And you have to bring it now with something different, which has a lot more understanding of their world and how you solve a problem versus the understanding of your product that it specs. Because this one could be consumed without you. There's no longer the need and the requirement. And the fact of the matter that happens is there's another dimension that was added throughout this process that confuses everybody, and that's the whole world of product-led growth and buying through the internet, which caters to a certain type of deals, which are usually smaller, transactionally oriented. You buy a smaller type of a transaction, which has less risk for the customer as well in this one. So he created a different dynamic that is now mixed with everything else. Still, if you're going to make a strategic, important decision, you're going to make several $1 million worth of investments, you need to understand that, you can truly trust the partner on the other side to be there with you. If you buy something for $19, like the software we're looking at for editing our videos and stuff, is a very different, you don't want to go talk to a sales guy. And so I think that was also thrown into the mix with product-led growth being part of the mix, or self-service or things like that, that completely kind of mixed everything. Although I would say this about these ones. The art parts of the sales still exists, even in those self-service product-led growth motions. It's just being delivered differently. It's not being delivered with a salesperson. It's being delivered through how you set up your website, your agents, your robots, your things like that, because you still need to build these fundamental connection points for your audience, and how do you impact their lives, and that you're a trustworthy kind of a vendor or solution for it. Now, the risk tolerance is, risk is very low. There's always two things, right? There is the economics of the seller, like what am I going to deploy to get this? And there's the risk factor for the buyer. It's like the bigger the risk, the more process they have to go through. The lower the risk, the easier the transaction is. And you always have to balance these two. And so you deliver differently because of the economics to a low risk kind of a transaction, but you still need to deliver it.
So there's a couple of things that I want to unpack there with you. One is, as the transaction increases in size, do you think that, and when you said this, I started thinking this way, but do you think that the art piece of the transaction becomes more important, right? Like your point, like, even what you described, if you're buying a piece of $19 software, like that's, they display it as art because you're looking at the website and you're looking at the 3 columns and all of that stuff. But like, it's ultimately science because they're A/B testing all of the data that goes into that to make sure that what has the highest likelihood of clicking. Let's go to you go from a $19 deal to a, $2 million deal. Does the $2 million deal require more art behind it because it's going to require more savviness, to the point that we were talking about last week with selling value and business justifications? Like all of that feels like more art to me than the science of, hey, I just, there's not that many people that are going to buy $2 million worth of software. So you need to be a little bit more suave and sophisticated to have those kinds of conversations than just, if I make 100 cold calls and I follow this script that, some third party has A/B tested 100 times, and you follow up with this thing and you go through the sales process and all of that, like that feels like it falls down at that, at least in my experience, that falls down at kind of the $2+ million range, or even like, probably $500,000 range.
Yep. So the answer is probably yes and no, right? Because I think, yes, you'll need...
Way to be committal.
Yeah, it's just, yes, because you need more, more art, and you need more science, if it's a more complex situation. But I think the distribution between them is probably the same. It's somewhere between 50-50 to 60-40, or 40-60, depends kind of where it lands, because you still need to, in a simpler transaction, there's less science and less art needed, but there is, right? Even the little wordings that you pick about trying to create an emotional kind of safe place for me on a self-service motion, right? If you say free, or free for life, or no credit card requires, or no commitment requires, there's little nuances you can play in creativity, or say, good for everybody, or, good for starting in the business, good for professional. But those labeling and those creativity parts, pieces of art about how do I connect to my, you're just dealing with a smaller scope And so you'll need a lot less art. And also your numbers and your statistics and your science is smaller. It's like I'm driving that much traffic and that's what I want to convert. And if they are coming in and, they're individuals that fit my ICP, then they do it. But it's kind of a contagion, but you'll still be split it about the same. When you get to these bigger, larger deals, which, sometimes in today's world even start when you cross into the six figures world. You don't have to be in the seven. You just have more stakeholders and more people and more dimensions of a group decision and the financial aspects, and you might be getting a lot more risks than you have to get with a simple transaction of $19 with a monthly commitment versus $30 million with a 3-year commitment. But I think their distribution is probably the same. I think it's just what happens in each of them is different, and what happens today versus 10 years ago, that's different too. But it's still the
same. And what I don't want to be cautious of is, because I agree with you, like it is a fine, there's a fine split between art and science. I think that if you are too heavily focused one way or the other, you're not going to be successful. And I think technology can guide you, but it's not going to replace trust. It's not going to replace empathy. It's not going to replace that human connection. For the most part, like the $19 self-service thing, like I don't know the people at that company, don't really care about them. I'm sure they're wonderful people, but at the end of the day, like I'm either going to have the $19 software or not, and I don't expect to talk to a seller. But like if I'm doing a huge transaction, I do think that buyers want to buy from people that they like and that they believe in. And in order to build that level of trust, you have to have the active listening and the active storytelling and that emotional intelligence. Those things are completely irreplaceable. No algorithm or piece of technology is ever going to be able to read the room for you. So even in this data-driven world, like we have to be able to adapt mid-conversation here, or it's just we're going to go all down the art path.
That spills a little bit to I think the different discussion around AI in this world, which I think is whether it can or cannot do it. But I would say that I think at the end of the day, every decision, every purchase decision is really an emotional decision. It's been there for forever. And there's a side discussion to have what happens with AI agent buying from AI agents. Well, we'll keep it for later into that. But it's all emotional decisions. In the $19, it's an emotional decision, and in the $30 million, it's an emotional decision. And so if it is, and it's backed up by all the other things that helps us justify that we're making the right decision, and there's a whole process of trying to influence me about this is where you should feel safe and the least risk for you to make it, you'll have to do it. And I think the bigger it is, the more you'll need the comfort of the human connection that you just outlined very well in terms of like, I need the guy, I need to trust him, he need to give me the story, I need to feel good about this stuff. But even in our $19 decision, we wanted to feel good. I was looking at all the different websites and we're trying to compare and trying to mitigate the $19 risk. And these were looking good. And then there's some reference, and other people on YouTube said this was a good thing, you should try it, and this is good for this. And they had an influencer, they paid me to go do it. And said, hey, you made a good point. So he created the connection for me, for them. So as I said, you'll deliver these things in maybe a broader set of avenues than from before. There was just one sales guy. And you deliver something different, right? He didn't deliver me the spec. The spec I can read by myself on the webpage. He delivers the experience and how he felt about it, and that goes to selling. I mean, he was basically selling it for them.
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess the action item for people is that you can't succeed on art alone. You can't succeed on science alone. Like there has to be that fine balance there. Like sales isn't just a numbers game. Like when we were talking about earlier, we have to make the 100 calls to get to 10 meetings and the one deal. Interestingly, it's a people game that's informed by numbers.
Yeah, exactly. And this is kind of the art, that's built on science. And by the way, we talk about numbers game. We'll talk about AI, but AI is proving that the numbers game is not working, because before that, the human was slowing it down, and I could run through these 100 calls in less than 1 minute, and I still don't get the results I wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Um,
um,
and again, and obviously being likable helps, but if you don't have that data-driven strategy, you're just kind of like, I'll throw some spaghetti at the wall and see what happens there.
yeah.
So, like, I do think like you have to be able to marry the two. Kind of
More
like what we were talking
sophisticated
about.
science. There's more
Yeah,
sophisticated science and more capable science now than you had before. So you have access to a lot more data points, a lot more understanding of your environment. As I said earlier, it's kind of like understanding the world. You could better understand your world and become a lot more focused and a lot more precise in what you do. And on your art side, you can't just you can't be superficial anymore. You really have to learn the human science and how to
yeah,
leverage it. And what you have to bring to the table has to be more than a spec sheet, which you can get away with in press. So I think the overall level is rising. Like any
yeah.
sports, it gets better and better. Every year players are getting better, and the same thing is happening in sales. We had a little gap, I think, with COVID where people kind of lost some of that practice.
Absolutely. And I think like we were talking about last week, with, a great product gets you the ticket, but it doesn't, you have to have business value to get you the
Yeah,
deal. It's the same way. Science is going to get you in the door. The
yeah,
art is going to get the deal signed. Um, so I think, in closing here, then, the question that we started off with is this art or is it science? The discussion was great. And I think what we ended up with is it's both, right? The art gets amplified by the science and the science gets amplified by the humanized art. I think that if you're all science, like you got to get out behind a dashboard and pick up the phone and call people, right? It's easy to sit there and just hit the send button and send out 1,000 emails a day. But if that's all you're doing, like that's not really selling. You're just like a email bot, like you're a human email bot. And I think like the best salespeople today, they're not the Don Drapers, they're not the used car sales guy, they're the strategic, empathetic, data-driven pros that know how to blend that connection within the science of precision, that art connection within the science of precision, I would say.
you have to be a lot smarter. You leverage a lot more
Yep.
technologies, but you have to connect the dots and connect to the people. And I think the other part I'll add to this is you have to kind of up level your game in today's world. So one of the takeaways, not just okay, it's art and science. It's there's things for you to do in both lanes, and you have to go do them.
Right.
Get your science game up. There's a lot more to do. Be smarter and more precise. Get your art game up. Deliver value. Help people, their world, not yours, and understand how to connect and how to influence people. So much in influencing people that nobody used to, teach salespeople. And the
Yeah,
greatest one just learned it by trial and error. Now it's like becoming table stakes.
exactly right. It's a great way to finish. Well, and with that, thank everybody for taking the time to listen. Don, thanks so much. Always good to catch up.
Oh, it's
We'll
awesome.
see you
I
in a
love this
week.
discussion. All right. See you later.